As I said, I'm Paul Sweeting. I'm the co-chair of the Rights Tech portion of this event, which is tomorrow. I'm your substitute teacher today, so no fooling around in the back of the classroom. So we're here to talk about the possible implications and use cases for blockchain within the gaming industry and within the media industries more generally. To my immediate right is William Quigley from Opskins and Wax. I don't know how many of you heard his presentation earlier this morning, but he had some very interesting thoughts on this topic that I want to come back to. To his right, Stu Levy from Tokyo Pop, one of, if not the first manga companies in the United States.
Yep.
And to his right is why did I just blank on you?
Wes
Levin. Wes from Theta Labs, which has an interesting project that it's working on involving essentially distributed or decentralized distributed content distribution networks. Not exclusively to games, although for now working primarily in the games area. Is that correct?
Yep, yeah, that's correct.
So, William, you were talking earlier this morning about your thoughts on sort of the real ownership of virtual goods by leveraging blockchain, and that's a very interesting area that's being looked at in a number of different media circles. You made a interesting case for it in the games space. It's something that is being looked at in the visual arts world, the collectibles world. You have things like CryptoKitties and other sorts of virtual creative works that are tradable on exchanges. And in the case of CryptoKitties, there have been, everybody here familiar with CryptoKitties? Yeah. There have been at least a dozen of them since it started that have traded for north of 6 figures, so over 100,000 US dollars, which is kind of nuts, but there's clearly a market there. It's becoming a hot topic of discussion within the world of fine arts, in which it's a little bit of a different phenomenon, but it involves fractional, ownership of works of art that you don't actually possess, but you can get a financial interest in their future appreciation. Could you just quickly summarize what you were talking about this morning with respect to virtual goods and real ownership of virtual goods, and what is different about that from the current situation with virtual goods?
Today in video games, the virtual items are owned by the video game company. They are licensed to the players as an entertainment value you get while you're playing a game. You don't own them. For video games that allow people to trade items back and forth, you can acquire an item and you can pay for it. But even if you paid for it and you paid a lot of money for it, it's not yours. It belongs to the video game company. If the video game company ceases to exist, or if it simply decides it doesn't like the fact that you've bought an item as opposed to taking it directly or acquired it directly from the video game company, then they can seize it. And so I think this is not a good model, particularly since we have probably about $100 billion every year now that's being spent to acquire these virtual items. It's enough money now where it seems like their model should evolve. And the video game companies, I think, should start to allow people who have these items to retain them. Now, you can't really retain them in a traditional video game because they exist within the game database. But if the virtual items were created on a blockchain, you could own them directly as a holder of that private key on that blockchain. That begins to change how people think about these pieces of property, right? And once you provide people with full ownership rights, they start to do things with them that maybe they didn't do before. And of course, when you collect things that are very expensive to collect, you don't feel good when somebody takes them from you simply because, oh, you violated the term of service, which wasn't really developed at a time where these items were worth a lot to begin with. And so I'm thinking virtual items that are created within a blockchain are at this point a better way to go. Now there's scale issues and all that we have to deal with. Blockchains today do not run at a commercial scale. And it costs a lot of money to create these items. We can talk about that on the blockchain. But those problems are being solved by companies like Wax, where I'm the CEO, and other companies. It will get more affordable. And we've seen with one virtual item that doesn't have any video game at all. It's called Vigo. It's just a virtual item or a series of virtual items created on a blockchain. People trade them a lot, and they like to own them. So I think this is an early sign that the blockchain is going to have an effect on the video game world.
So, but typically property rights are the sine qua non of markets, but clearly $100 billion isn't chump change. So
Yep.
there has been a market that has developed here in the absence of actual ownership.
Well, right, but I would say to you, yes, but as these items become worth more and more and more, right, you will see, I think, a vastly bigger market develop if people actually owned them. Think about it this way: if you bought a car and the manufacturer said, "Here's your car, but you can never resell it," how many fewer cars would the world buy? Or if you bought your house and the home builder said, "You can use it as you wish, but you can never resell it," you'd have a lot fewer people buying and selling, right? So I think it's a great sign. $100 billion is spent on virtual items today. Imagine if you actually owned them directly. It could be $500 billion.
What would,
So maybe we
Yeah, I agree with that. Fundamentally, what we're talking about is turning from what is a $100 billion industry right now, even when it's fundamentally a depreciating asset, when this in-game item can't last any longer than the current game you're working on. But if you can turn it into something like an appreciating asset, you can imagine a lot more people be willing to invest serious money, especially if it's what's a scarce asset. And that's another way blockchain plays right into this, because you can guarantee the scarcity of one of these, say, legendary items that you don't have to worry if you're going to spend $1,000. I've seen them go for even more. If you know for a fact, indisputably, that you own the only copy of that, and even 10 years from now when it's ported to a different game, you still own the only one of those that will ever exist. It unlocks a lot of potential value.
Up until now, there's actually been a pretty robust marketplace for virtual items that takes place kind of in the black market. I know a number of people who've been involved in, for instance, with Warcraft. There's a lot of buying and selling that's happened over the years. People buy virtual items from other people for quite a lot of money. But the issue really is, I think, in the future, ultimately, if you're able to use these items across games. And I'm just curious, how many of you guys saw the movie Ready Player One? Pretty much most people, right? To me, I don't know what you guys think, I mean, book aside, but in terms of visually in the movie, seeing where theoretically we could be 20 years from now, 30 years from now, in my view, a virtual item or virtual, an avatar, or, a costume or something that you have, how you could theoretically take it across in your entire experience that's happening in a virtual world, across games and other things. That's where it becomes important to own your own virtual items.
And that's what Vigo does. With Vigo items, they can be used within other games. There's probably about 100 different games today that are using the items, and it's growing. The business models, of course, have to adopt, because the first thing most video game companies say is, why do I want to invite in Vigo items? That's what we sell.
Right.
And as we heard earlier today in a panel about challenges of video gaming, the biggest challenge is cost of customer acquisition. Well, if you can invite people who already own virtual items into your game so they can use those, there's a chance those people will then buy the virtual items in your game. And think about this, about 95% of all the people who play free-to-play items never actually buy an item. So you're not actually risking a lot by inviting somebody in to say, bring your virtual item in here, and hopefully you can merchandise to them and they'll buy your virtual item too.
And where are we as an industry in terms of the portability and transferability of these virtual items from one game contract to
So
another?
I'm only aware of Vigo so far. I think that's the first that is allowing it. You will, though, I suspect.
Is that a question of standards? Is it a technical question? Is it a question
It's
of
not,
business?
no, the Vigo developers had no problem developing it. It's very much a question of business model and idea. How long did free-to-play as a concept exist in video gaming? Maybe 10 years before American video game companies said, okay, we don't want to give away our game, but maybe we should give it a try. The whole point of it was, it's a user acquisition model. You bring people in and then you figure out a different way to monetize. The video game industry has grown maybe 4x since we adopted free-to-play. So that's what it is. Business models are tough things for people to adopt.
Well, I think one point here is actually, it's a good point about 10 years before it came to America, because those 10 years were basically in Asia. So if you look at what's happening in Asia, and you look at what's happening with cryptocurrency, blockchain, how it's developing, you actually can have some hints for what can happen here in the US too. I don't know if anybody's familiar with a company named that has a game development platform called Cocos. Anybody familiar with it? Yep. So Cocos just announced recently that they're actually doing this exact same thing, based in China, but also now in the West too. And I just was reading they raised like 40 million or something to do the Cocos BCX, which is a new blockchain exactly for virtual items and other in-game items, things like that. So I think in Asia, this is moving along faster than it is here in the US, and keeping our eye on
And
Korea and China.
what's the vector that brings those developments here? Is it you? Is it?
I mean, it was you one time.
Well, I definitely track it, and when there's an opportunity, I get involved for sure. I mean, I can't do everything myself, and there's a lot of people that are aware. But I think people are not aware of what's happening in Asia to the degree that they could be if they pay more attention. It's for sure the hotbed. So I would recommend, if any, raise your hand if you're a game developer. Anyone? If you're a game publisher? If you're, now I'm curious, what else are you
Game
guys,
player?
Are you interested in becoming a game developer in the future?
Do any of you know why you're here?
Anyone play a game ever? Anyways, if you keep your eye on Asia, I think it's a good idea, because a lot of these trends start there and then they come down.
Well, one of the things that you're working on is live streaming of esports, and you're building a platform to enable that business that's already a pretty
Esports, that's not popular at all, is it?
Right.
pretty large business.
Sure.
What is blockchain bringing there that the current state of play, if you will, can't deliver?
Sure. For us, at least in our use case, so just for some context, Theta is creating a distributed CDN. So essentially, the way Akamai or AWS moves content from when you pull a YouTube video to actually sending it to you, that's what we're trying to do on a distributed fashion. Now, it doesn't work in every case. It really is, what we're creating is something that works in conjunction with the existing CDN players, but it's more efficient in the edge cases where you're far from a CDN presence. and our parent company is an esports streaming site. Where
Let me stop you for, everybody know what a CDN is and its role in the distribution of content.
it basically moves the video from YouTube to your desktop where you watch it. They're the ones who actually push the video.
And
Disperse
do
its
that-
packets of data so it's
Right.
efficient over the full internet. It's actually relatively similar to what we do in DLTs and blockchain too.
Mhm. Yeah, what we essentially were trying to solve is our problem for the esports streaming site we have, where we have these distributed viewers. Esports is obviously a global phenomenon. We have, in fact, more of our users come from Brazil than any other country, many in Korea, and they tend to have very concentrated areas of users where peer-to-peer solution actually works. So if you can move the video over traditional lines to these pockets of viewers, then it's more efficient to distribute it peer-to-peer on there. And where blockchain comes into play, it doesn't actually move the video. You don't need a blockchain to do that. But what it does is allows you to have this distributed CDN, have a distributed ledger where that can be tracked without a central party. You know, we're creating this baby, but eventually we want to push out into the world where we have no control over it. The way it plays into esports is just engagement. I mean, you have a user base that's tailor-made for this. I mean, the average demographics for esports, it almost aligns perfectly with blockchain. You have a younger demographic that is not scared of digital currencies, that thinks virtual currencies is something they've always used. Like, this is completely normal to them. And the idea of a community and being engaged and earning rewards to these tokens for doing work on the network is tailor-made for this type of demographic.
So what does Akamai think of what you're doing?
You know, the conventional wisdom on what we assumed first is that they would say, you're taking our market share, so this is, they'd be our competitor, but we don't see it that way. We actually think, because we are not...
You're not actually delivering the video.
We are, but only for the last mile, so to speak. So we're something that works in conjunction with these existing CDNs. And we think the initial reaction will be that you're a threat, we're trying to disrupt it, but one of our advisors told us a story that I think is instructive in this case, that the CDNs also hated compression at first, you know, because they charge by the byte, and if you compress files, then the thought is, well, now we have less we can charge for, so compression is the enemy. The reality is, once they did once compression became ubiquitous, all it did is free up more capacity for them to deliver more content and do it in a way that's better for consumers. Because now you can have better quality video or more data pushing through. So I think it'll be similar. I think we'll be looked at as a threat initially, but once they realize that we're just trying to work in conjunction with the existing system, it'll be different.
I'd like to add in, so, you know, I know the panel is talking about blockchain and gaming, but it also says in the panel introduction that we want to talk a little bit about other aspects of entertainment.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, I'm basically a comics guy. So I'm here in town for this, but also for New York Comic Con, which is up the street. Anybody ever read comics before? Or manga? Got some people who raised their hand on that one. So basically, you know, I come at looking at this technology from the point of view, how can we get more people to read comics? And is there a way that we can do it efficiently so that there's a tremendous amount of interest in Southeast Asia, in Latin America, even in Africa and Middle East to read comics, but there is no traditional distribution method of books. It's just not efficient, it doesn't make sense. So it's interesting because on the one hand, blockchain and crypto disrupts existing industries like finance and other things like that. But in our case, there's actually an opportunity for it to create an industry that doesn't really exist at all because the supply chain and the infrastructure is just not profitable. It doesn't make sense for anybody. So by having an even more efficient supply chain using the technology of blockchain, we think that there's a way to bring stuff from a creator, bring comics from a creator, ultimately to a fan across the world, and monetize that in the process, get the creator paid, which right now is just so difficult to do that there are many creators that are frustrated. They draw and they create incredible comics, and they really, frankly, can't even make a living from it. And some of these creators are in third world countries and all over the world. So our goal is to really empower creators and use blockchain to do that.
So that's a good jumping off point. Where does the panel think or which of the various media verticals is most ripe for blockchain applications?
Well, that's, for me, it's pretty
For you,
obvious. It's very, we invest across all areas of crypto. There has been no mass consumer adoption of anything in blockchain, right? It's a few tens of millions of people who are familiar with it, maybe under 10 million people who actively have a wallet, so it is tiny, tiny, tiny today. But outside of video gaming, it's non-existent, right? And from an entertainment perspective, certainly non-existent.
Well, I dispute that a little bit. I think that there are sort of two different markets.
That exist today.
Yeah, I think
Okay.
what you're talking about is really a consumer-facing market, where consumers
Yeah.
are buying and selling, virtual goods.
Yep.
There are blockchain applications in other media verticals that are probably more at the B2B level.
Not being used though.
They're not being used.
That's what I'm saying. You asked what's being adopted. The only thing that's been
No, I asked
adopted so far.
which is which industry is most in need, let's put it that way.
So, well, let me put it this way. The film industry, of which I used to work at a studio, the film industry is constantly looking for one thing, which is people who will give them money to finance movies, right? That's what they do. And when I was at Disney, we had Silverstream Partners. We figured out a way to get multiple private investors to invest in films. I would say the most dramatic effect that could happen in the film business is using ICOs as a way to raise capital for film projects. That would be immediate, it could be done today, and it would be useful.
And
though it has not happened
there
much
are
yet.
startups trying to
A
make
few.
that happen.
Yeah.
Assuming people still want to watch movies.
Yeah, I believe they do, but yeah, it's a smaller audience than gaming for sure. 30 billion versus 150
Well, it
billion.
depends on what you mean. They may not watch them in movie theaters, but I don't think long-form narrative storytelling is going to go away. I mean, humans have been
Let's
doing
hope
that.
not.
Well, I mean, humans have been doing that since
Yeah.
the dawn of time.
Yeah,
I
with
mean,
Twitch and YouTube, it's a little bit shorter format, but it's happening.
It's a fun debate. I mean, definitely, you and I both have done a lot in the film business, but pretty much everybody I know in the film business is screaming every single day, "Oh my God, am I going to have a job in here?" It's
Yeah.
not an easy industry right now.
That's very true.
But if you make a 90-minute story and you sell it to Netflix, there's people who will watch it, and Netflix will buy it from you if they like it. But that demand is becoming less and less. Marvel aside.
Yeah, DRM is, I think, digital rights
Yes.
management is something that blockchain can contribute to the content creators to help
Yes,
that
for sure.
as well.
Yeah, rights management is, I think of the areas that you're asking about, to me, rights management is probably the next area that will become relevant for blockchain, or at least smart contracts. I don't know that smart contracts utilizes blockchain theoretically, but doesn't have to utilize blockchain to exist. It can utilize Hyperledger and other DLT, but a way to automate, in essence, the rights management system in a way that you can have a non-trusted party and still have it work, that's attractive.
Yeah, the music industry would probably be chomping at the bit for that to disintermediate the PROs and the other groups that are taking 15% cuts to pay out royalties 6 months later. It's extremely inefficient. It's basically operates that way just because of inertia and because of the power of those groups that do it. But if someone can get the right players on board, Spotify, big record labels, and introduce something that's much more efficient, that could actually be one of the killer apps that get something like the music industry into the blockchain space, or just distributed ledger.
Book publishing as well. I mean, I'm obviously in the book publishing arena for comics, and it's incredible how outmoded a lot of the systems are. Even, for instance, something like Comixology, efficient.
Well, somebody famous in the music industry who quipped that the music industry, when it comes to the adoption of new technology, the music industry comes in somewhere just behind the Amish. But I think the book industry, the book publishing industry, may be even a little further behind.
Yeah.
We only have a few minutes left, I think. So, are there any questions? Yes. No. Hi.
Yeah, I have a question. You guys are talking about blockchain for music rights. My question is, yes, it does seem like it could be a logical alternative, but sort of backing up what Paul said, people move very slowly, and the bigger players would want to know that it was enterprise ready and scalable, because there are billions of transactions. So what do you believe is the time frame realistic for blockchain to potentially catch on just for the contract part?
I can speak to that. Right now, we have a blockchain, WAX, and we probably do more transactions using dApps. These are distributed applications that sit on the blockchain. We have more transactions than Ethereum. And I can tell you that it is very hard to do anything at scale with blockchain. There is a reason why most things are centralized, not decentralized. As soon as you put a consensus mechanism on something and say, instead of going from point A to point B, we're going to have you go through a distributed group of nodes, and each of them are going to do some work, whether it's proof of work or proof of stake, that's incredibly taxing and slow. I mean, think about Ethereum. It's 7 to 10 transactions a second. I mean, it's not ready. Having said that, WAX is getting up there. EOS is getting up there, maybe 4,000 transactions a second right now. I would say in 6 months, we will be able to do a lot of mid-size applications on a blockchain, and maybe in 2 years, commercial scale.
And how are you actually accomplishing that? By moving things off-chain? By
Very much so, yeah. You're basically decoupling the transaction processing piece, which does not need to be done on the blockchain, from the accounting or auditing piece, which does, to keep everything honest. So side chains are right now hybrid concepts. I would say that is, the conventional thinking today is side chains is the way you do it. Main nets, where everything runs on one big distributed net. I think main nets are quite unlikely to be the future for blockchains.
One other area that I think is a bit more scalable right now is in permissioned DLT. So for instance, some people we're working with out of Korea, they're working with IBM's Hyperledger Fabric. And by doing that, we're talking about pretty much 10 years of development and a lot of, enterprise level applications that are scalable. But it's not the full 100% decentralized, permissionless dream that a lot of kind of early adopters want. But is that dream even realistic? Ultimately, is kind of a longer discussion.
And that's probably not what the music industry wants.
Right.
Really, like they see the appeal of a more efficient and more transparent ledger, but they're not looking for something that's 100% permissionless and completely trustless. There probably is like in the case of music royalties, there's probably a somewhat limited number of actors in the given system besides the eventual artist it goes to. But there's only so many labels and distribution companies that it needs to work with, so you can know who all those people are. So you don't need to actually have a fully decentralized blockchain system.
But for me, the main two things that are the attraction of using blockchain or similar technologies in the future, it's really, in my opinion, it's not about not having any centralized party or any trusted party involved. It's more a question of, one, transparency. So being able to have your participants along the path be able to know and believe that they're not getting ripped off. And then two, automation, just more efficient, faster, easier to access. Microtransactions can happen. You can pay somebody a penny and not pay PayPal, $5 to pay 1 penny. Those are things that I think are really interesting.
Time for maybe one more question.
I was wondering about other blockchain in-game applications besides the in-game assets. So in particular, there's two. One is just sort of like premium tokens or something like that. The Holy Grail of like a universal currency, and then on the other hand, people that are actually making games that are on the blockchain, whether they're gambling games or other games. I'm just wondering about thoughts about the other parts of the blockchain game.
Yeah, I will tell you this. It's been fascinating to me that in the maybe 11 months since CryptoKitties first used the ERC 721 standard to create NFTs, and though you couldn't even call that a game, I mean, it's an embarrassment to call it a game, we have gone from there to War Riders and Gods Unchained, which are good quality, indie level games that are using the blockchain in creative ways. In the case of War Riders, it's a kind of a post-apocalyptic scene where you drive around in these NFTs that are buggies, and just like Mad Max, the movie, they were looking for gasoline. So you look for what they call benzene, which is a coin that it's a game mechanic. You mine that coin in the game, and then of course you can steal it from other people, like you can steal their gasoline. So it's using something that blockchain has, which is creating coins and mining, and gamifying it. That's a good use case. The challenge, of course, today is if you want to interact with that game when it goes live, like all these NFTs, you have to use MetaMask. That's a browser that sits on Ethereum, which doesn't work. We at Wax created a browser that does work. It's lots of transactions. It's easy. You don't have to pay in Ethereum. You can pay with regular dollars. It'll be a hybrid approach to gaming. The MetaMask type thing isn't going to work. I think there's not a lot to say today about video gaming that is 100% like blockchain centric. The systems aren't fast enough. It costs way too much to transact. It can cost 50 cents to create a virtual item. But a hybrid approach, for sure. You get fun game mechanics that crypto people already like. Trading is sort of like video gaming, and people enjoy it. And then you get real creative people who are actually building the games. Initially, video gaming came from, I think, on the blockchain was mostly people who were crypto people first. And now we're starting to see video game-centric people use the blockchain in a novel way.
So as far as the token economy goes, I hate to say the same thing again about Asia, but I believe looking to Asia is the way to understand how cryptocurrencies and tokens in particular will really be integrated into gaming. There's two main companies to keep your eye on. One is based out of Japan, although technically they're Korean-owned, and that's called Line. And raise your hand if you've heard of Line before. Line has a whole range of apps, including their Messenger app, which is kind of the center of their ecosystem, but many games. So they've just announced that they're doing a cryptocurrency. Supposedly it will come out in the next few months. They're going to probably start it in simple little transactions, but most likely their goal is to have it fuel the entire ecosystem and then go out beyond their own ecosystem, I would think.
Yeah.
And then another company who has announced some early versions of that, but not quite as aggressively yet as Line, but I'm sure they will, and that's Tencent. Through, of course, their WeChat platform, but they already have WeChat Pay. Alibaba has Alipay. There's a lot of these virtual currencies that exist. They're just not yet crypto. And so, of course, because of China, there's a lot of issues in terms of making sure the government feels comfortable with the regulatory side. But I believe that these are companies that will be super aggressive, and they're very, very strong game companies.
Okay, so the main takeaway here is we should do this conference in Asia. But I think we have to leave it there. I want to thank the panel for a very interesting discussion.
Bye-bye.